But I wanted very clearly that this film was about the British, and the British being complicit in this, and they still are. But and not to tell like all the stories and all the stories of Palestine and all the other communities and the stories of the Zionists coming and the story of this, or people that weren't even Zionists. They were Jews that were fleeing persecution and fascism and Nazism in Europe, another European invention, and they came to for safety and protection. But I wanted to keep the focus on the British and their role in this.
The most striking thing, I guess, for somebody who, at least somebody who knows the history, is why 1936, and also, it's not just about 1936. Obviously, it's so clear in the way the film is shot, and the story, the narrative, the characters, the details. 1936 was pivotal to what happened after 1936, obviously. 1936 set the stage for 1948. 1948 set the stage for what's happening right now. You're filming this film while the genocide in Gaza is unfolding. All these things are happening kind of overlapping and in parallel. So walk us through, from your own standpoint, the relationship between these continuing, overlapping, parallel structures, because that's to my mind, that's one of the most extraordinary things about the film.
Yeah, it's interesting because I keep saying that I never felt it was never a period film, right? It didn't feel like I was dealing with 1936 and why 1936. It was such a pivotal moment, but it was this really our first mass uprising, and we had other uprisings before this, but this one was the mass, widespread uprising across classes, from the villages to the cities, and it sets the stage for everything, and it never ends, right? It just never ended. When I started working on this project was almost a decade ago, with writing and researching, and then the financing stage, and we didn't think, and I would have no way to imagine that when it came time to film it, was right at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, and how we're this thing is still going, and so it feels like it never ended, and that's why it doesn't feel like a period film for me. And I didn't want it to feel like a thing of the past, because it's absolutely of the present, and that the whole system of occupation that we live today is all, the blueprint is here, the setup for all of it is in 36.
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing. The setup is there in 36, but it's like we haven't moved beyond 36. In other words, 1936 is a replay of 48, is a replay of 2025, the whole thing it's a loop almost.
Yeah.
It's like a palimpsest. It's basically. It just keeps cycling.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, kind of nightmarish. But on the other hand, there is something different about 36 than 48 or 67 and choose your disaster, which is that in 1936, Palestine is still Palestine. Mm. That's a gigantic difference, right? So, and that to me is one of the most striking things about the film too. I gather some of the like the small screen footage is actually archival, right? That you've.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about the relationship between the archival and the? Sorry, I'm not a film person. So technical term.
Yeah,
the big picture.
The screen, when the ratio, when the screen is a different ratio, that's all archival. Okay. And when it's wider, it's all what we shot. Yeah. And so archive was something I relied on a lot for the research. In the research phase, it was something I relied on a lot with the work with the production designer, my costume designer. We were constantly, our whole office was like plastered with, photographs, and we were looking at these newsreels. The British filmed everything. And it was important to the preparation, but I had written it into the script as well, that there were certain moments in the script that would go to archive. There are many reasons for that. one of them is financial, that it's a big film for Palestine, but it's not a big film in a global scale. We didn't have the budget to do everything we wanted. So I could have archive to show that world where we couldn't, in the play. We recreated that world as much as possible. But some places we couldn't do that, and also those places are gone, and that world is lost. So archive was important then, and then I colorized it. The archive was black and white, and I colorized it, and that was important for me for the film because it's part of that feeling alive, and that feeling that it's present. And it's part of the character's world. And if we'd gone back to archive when it's black and white, it would feel like we were going backwards. Or I'm telling the audience, look, this happened. This is the past. But I didn't want it for that purpose. Like, see how we were. No, this is how we are, and we're going forward in the narrative. And so colorizing it, I felt like really gave that and made it feel alive, because the project was always a live thing.
Yeah.
And then after, this project struggled a lot to be made because, after October 7th, we had to shut down and we lost everything. We lost our locations. So then Archive had another purpose because we couldn't film in the village that we had prepared 1 year to shoot in anymore. So
where was the village?
So that village is north of in the West Bank near Salfit. And we had restored a village, and we'd planted crops there, and we'd built all the the military, the bus. We'd made the bus, we made the military vehicles, and all of that. All of that was lost, and we had to restart again later, a year later, but and in Jordan, not in Palestine. So the film was partly shot in Palestine, partly shot in Jordan. But then Archive suddenly had another meaning because the genocide had begun, and it was like, okay, now the place that we live and we're from, we're not able to shoot here, so we're shooting in Jordan, and Archive then became even more precious to me because like this is the world we're talking about.
Yeah, but even Annemarie, even in that moment, even in the moments of the film that are clearly pre-Nakba, pre-1948, I mean, the whole thing is obviously pre-Nakba, but it's anticipating what's to come.
Yeah.
But some of the most powerful and moving scenes to me were the ones where this is clearly, you can imagine, Palestine was a country, there were people doing their own thing, living their lives.
Yeah.
And then this catastrophe came to them. That is so palpable in the film. So what was it like putting your head, because we don't really think about before very much, especially our generation, like we think about, we've been living with this, we were born into this world of catastrophe and dispossession and loss and ongoing nightmares and the genocide now. What was it like to visually recreate the old Palestine, the Palestine before the loss?
I mean, that it was, we were obsessive about it. And my art department and my production designer and the whole, team that worked on this, being Palestinians, all of those details really mattered to us. Like the cloth, the way, the typewriter of Khulud, that, we found a typewriter from 1942. I didn't want the typewriter from 1942. I want the typewriter from 1936. We found a typewriter in Beirut from 1936. We brought it to Palestine. Like all those things that, people don't even see the typewriter that well in the film, but it's it's full of details like that. The women's demonstration in front of the High Commissioner's office, those photographs of the women's demonstration, the women were demonstrating in front of the High Commissioner's office. We looked at those pictures. The costume designer, we showed, the extras and the women in that scene are, one by one, almost matching exactly women in the photographs of that moment. I think we were all a little sick and obsessed with it, getting it right, and it's important. All of those details.
But did you ever get lost in that? I mean, in your imagination, did you ever go back in time in your own head and just sort of were there. This is
Yeah, I
before.
think I'm still there.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think we haven't emerged yet. Actually, our production designer finally emerged because he went to Thailand for 6 weeks after we wrapped, and I think he's the only one who's come back like normal. We're still like, I think we're still in it, and it was also because, for me, it's been 10 years of all of the script and the this and the that, but then shooting it because of what happened and losing everything, and we had to stop and start 4 times, and all of us to keep holding on to it and insisting on doing it when everything was preventing us from doing it was, also part of this obsession, and that, we were now, not just obsessed, but we were now depressed and upset and witnessing all the violence around us. And it was a way to come together. The project was always important for the team, and then it suddenly had even more importance and felt so much more critical. And we have to do this. But I think it was like wearing blinders, like a horse. Like we have to do this. We have to do this, and.
Yeah. So one of the scenes there are so many striking scenes that one could talk about, but to me, one of the most striking scenes visually, and I don't know how accurate this was historically, it's certainly accurate more recently, was the scene where they're strapping the kid to the front of the Jeep. Yeah. Right? Because we've seen that's happened. That happens in the West Bank all the time.
Yeah.
That happened in Gaza, we know, during the genocide, where the Israelis would use human shields to push somebody in front of them to protect themselves. Or use like a canary in the coal mine and push a Palestinian civilian in front of their way. In other words, there are moments to this that are very much a commentary on what's happening now and for the past, our immediate 20-ish years since the Intifada, I guess.
Except for it's not.
Yeah. Tell us that. Yeah.
Like that particular, like that's what I mean with the whole system being set up is that using like people as human shields and tying them to a car so they could get out of the village. I saw photographs of that. The British recorded everything. They filmed everything and they photographed everything. And there's images of Palestinians being tied to the fronts of vehicles so they could get out of villages and go through the countryside and protect themselves. What's crazy is and of course we know that, of course, the Israeli army does that today, but what's crazy is that when we shot that particular scene that day, it was in June, and there was an incident where it was like, I think all over the news, where that the Israelis had tied a guy to the front of the car, and it was like parallel to the same day we were shooting, which was very it was very weird. Yeah.
So that's it. So there are these uncanny things where you're recreating 1936.
Yeah.
But 1936 is playing out in real time in 2023 or 24, or 25, whenever you filmed it, right?
Yeah.
So there's that parallelism. But then there's the other thing, which is of course clear here too. Yes, we see the Zionist settlement on the hilltops. Yes, you get they're there. But I think there's so many powerful things about this film. But another powerful element is that Zionism and the Zionist project is still kind of in the background.
Yeah.
Like it's not the agency for for oppression and violence is the British Army. Yeah. It's not the Zionists yet.
Yeah. So
how did you walk us through that too? Because that's also amazing.
For me, it's like I can't believe that this has been managed to have been erased from memory of the fact that the British were in Palestine and many, many other places. They'd become the experts, of colonial, control. And so when they were in Palestine, they, their system was almost perfected, except for when it wasn't, and they couldn't control the revolt. And so they brought in their people from other colonies to figure it out. But I wanted very clearly this film was about the British and the British being complicit in this, and they still are. But and not to tell all the stories of Palestine and all the other communities and the stories of the Zionists coming and the story of this or people that weren't even Zionists. They were Jews that were fleeing persecution and fascism and Nazism in Europe, another European invention, and they came to for safety and protection. But I wanted to keep the focus on the British and their role in this.
Yeah, because of course Balfour obviously plays a role. The Balfour Declaration.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, the Balfour Declaration in 1917, that was the declaration by which the British government pledged itself to support the the creation in Palestine of what they called a national home for the Jewish people. That was 1917 at a time when Palestine was 93% Muslim and Christian. And that's another thing that plays a role, that comes across very powerfully in the film, is the sense of Christianity and Islam coexisting. And so tell us a bit about that too, and about the role of that in that village, because that village, Besma, right?
Basma, which
It
is a
stands
fictional,
in, yeah, it's fictional, but it stands in for many
yeah,
villages.
it stands for many villages, but in particular, it's a stand-in of a mixture of two villages in Palestine for me when I was writing it. One of them is Lifta, which was a Muslim Christian village outside of Jerusalem, because I was interested in the relationship and talk about class more than religion. The villages were mixed religiously, and so were the cities. But I was more interested in the difference between class. And so I wanted a village where the people of the village could walk to Jerusalem or could take a bus or could, but there was a relationship between the two. And then the village of El Bassa, which is in the north of Palestine, where this incident in the film happens, where the rebels put a roadside bomb and attacked a British patrol. And so the army took it out on the closest village that they found, which was El Bassa, and they went into the village. And the events in the film of putting the people on the bus and the mine and all of that is actually happened. And I that was in 1938, 10 years before the Nakba. And I was like, I was very amazed also at that sort of violence that happened pre-Nakba. And I don't think a lot of people talk about it and know about it. And my family, and I think Palestinians don't talk about it a lot. We talk about the uprising, we talk about the strike. It was 6 months long. It was the longest strike in history. There's like all the pride in that. But we don't talk about the trauma of that violence. And as many communities don't talk about violence until generations later.
Yeah. Although that violence, the British repression of the nationalist uprising in 1936 and that whole period is what broke the back of the Palestinian resistance, so that when 1948 happened, there wasn't much of a Palestinian resistance because the British had already done the job in effect.
They had already exiled the leadership.
Yeah.
They had already, I think it was during the mandate, like 1 out of 10 Palestinian men already had been in prison.
Yeah.
They had the village files, which was like surveillance of every single village in Palestine. Who was active, who was educated, who was this, who was that, what were people doing? I mean, it was all mapped out.
Yeah, the preparatory role for that, that the British played in preparing the way for the Nakba of 1948 is very clear. And then also, again, that scene in particular where they go into the village and they round up people and they take people and they shoot people and so forth. Again, those scenes are played out in real time, now in our own day. How do you see the film? How do you see it in relationship to other recent Palestinian films?
I have never seen anything about this period. The only other film I've seen about this period is a Michael Winterbottom film called Shoshana, where Palestinians don't exist in it, really. But that's okay. That's the point of. That's the point of view of that story, and I think it's important to defend that. That nobody could tell all the stories of everything. So it's a good duel. Should be like a double bill somewhere, because it's exactly the same time as this, but it's like all in Tel Aviv, and I also, that's one of the reasons I wanted to make a film about this period, is because it's such a critical moment, and we don't know about it, we don't see it, we haven't seen it.
Yeah. And if you were to make a film about the Nakba itself, what would you do differently? What would you do the same? Do you think?
It's a different. It depends on the story. It's I think we've been talking about the Nakba, and we sort of start our history with the Nakba when we clearly can't. But it's important, and it's it defines all of us. We're all that's just one other one more thing in our history of
Yeah.
this spiral of into darkness. That's when we became refugees.
Right.
Yeah, like I think about the Nakba in relation to the characters of this film, like somebody like Amir or any of them, that in the characters in the film, in 10 years Palestine is gone, right? In 10 years, that couple's house, Amir and Khulud are refugees. They lose everything. They are, they don't live in that neighborhood anymore. Like all of the stories of the film. And then when I look at the archives, I think about that because that's the real story. And I wonder, in those archives, all those people in those archives, where are they? What happened to them? Who became a refugee? Who survived? Who didn't? There's a million stories in every image.
Yeah, that's the archival footage is so probing in that sense too. What about the interplay of, I mean, the Arabic and English, the going back and forth, also that lends this force that many other films don't, because we're in that the Arabic-speaking life world in Palestine before 1948. So what about filming? What is it like if you're going back and forth with actors who speak Arabic as opposed to English and so forth? What was that like
Yeah, it's a big cast. It's a lot of actors, and it was, it's an ensemble film. And so we had, I mean, in terms of language, we had 3 different dialect coaches in the film. There's every village in Palestine, people speak differently. So we had the village dialect. We came up with a dialect that was 1930s village, and we had a dialect coach, and she worked with all the actors because the actors come from all over Palestine, and to unify their language. And then there was a dialect coach for Jerusalem, the way people in Jerusalem speak. So that he worked with the 2 main actors, Khulud and Yasmin al-Masri and Dhafar al-Abidin, for that. And then for the British, for the English, there's like we had the third dialect person, because of course the British also have changed the way of speaking and certain words and language. So it was interesting working in language in that way, and then some of the actors move between languages, like Yasmin al-Masri's character of Khulud, and she's very comfortable in both languages. And I think what's interesting is when her accent comes out, when she can speak perfect British English, and when she chooses to roll her R's. And I think it's in it. We worked on that. We talked about that a lot in the filming. Like when does she do that, and why does she do that? And it was part of her character and her identity.
Yeah. Even though the film is about the coming disaster, I'm going to go back to this question about imagining Palestine before. There was a scene where there's a bus. I think it's a bus. You see the bus. It's in Arabic. This doesn't come across to those of you who speak English, but the bus says, I think it's Dimashq, so Damascus, Jerusalem, like it's a bus from Damascus in Syria to Jerusalem. That sense of openness too.
Yeah.
When you're making a film that's taking you back to a time when Palestine was connected to the rest of the Arab world, when it was possible to go from Damascus or Beirut or Cairo to Jerusalem or Jaffa or wherever, in going back to that time, were you also going forward to a time when we can reimagine Palestine being reconnected?
Yeah, when Yusuf gets off the train at the beginning, there's this poster that says it's for Baghdad.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like that. That's when the borders were more fluid than they are now, and I think it's a dream of everybody not to be able to move freely and to be able to visit cities, and it's a dream of every Palestinian. 75% of the population are refugees, like to come and visit Palestine, live in Palestine, just see Palestine. It's like an impossible dream now. And then all of the whole our region of people being able to move freely. So you can do that in cinema. I think that's one of the attractive things about cinema, is that you can be free, and you can surpass borders and boundaries, and it's, I don't know. For me, it's definitely one of the things that why I do this work.
One last question, which has to do with Palestine itself, the land, the place. Because even if it's partly filmed in Palestine and partly filmed in Jordan, one gets a sense of the beauty of Palestine too. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to hold on to that soil in your imaginative evocation of it, even? That there's a land to which we are connected. You know?
Yeah, I mean, the land for me is a major character in the film, and so it's this ensemble film with all these things, but the one thing that connects them all is land, and that's why it was so important for me that we filmed there. I mean, you know, we live there. It's part of our lives. I feel lucky for that I live on the land, and that we're there, and I know what a privilege that is. So for me, it's why after October 7th, when we lost everything, I didn't want to film somewhere else, because I want to see those particular stones, all those details, not just of the objects like the typewriter, blah blah blah, but also the land itself and the way things look and are. I think it's important, and it's such a big part of the story.
Yeah, the people and the land.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Yeah. Thank you very much, Annemarie.
Thank you.